The black SUV crept along the curb, its tinted windows concealing the two men inside. Marco Ramirez tapped his fingers impatiently against the dashboard, watching as the silver Honda pulled out of the driveway. The routine was always the same. Every morning, Angela Matthews drove her 8-year-old daughter, Sarah, to Cherry Creek Elementary. And every morning, she failed to notice the eyes watching her. Except today. Angela adjusted the rearview mirror, her instincts tingling. Something felt off. The dark SUV had been trailing too closely, slowing down when she did, keeping a steady distance. It wasn't just a coincidence. Beside her in the passenger seat, Sarah kicked her feet absent-mindedly, hugging her stuffed bear. "Mom, can we get ice cream after school?" Angela forced a smile. "Maybe, sweetheart. Let's get through your math test first." At her feet, Zeus stirred. The German shepherd lifted his head slightly, ears twitching. A low, nearly imperceptible growl rumbled in his throat. Angela's grip tightened on the wheel. Zeus was never wrong. 2 blocks away, Carlos Vega muttered into his radio. "Target is mobile. Proceeding as planned." Inside the SUV, Marco nodded. "Stay in position. We move when she reaches the school drop-off zone." They had studied this family for weeks, learning their patterns, their weaknesses. James Matthews, the father, was a Special Forces K-9 handler, but he was stationed at Fort Carson for training. That left only the mother and child an easy target. Or so they thought. Angela took a deep breath and made a sudden right turn away from the usual route. Sarah frowned. "Mom, this isn't the way to school." "Just taking the shortcut, honey." But in the rearview mirror, the SUV followed. Zeus sat up now, his muscles coiling beneath his thick fur. His dark eyes locked on the vehicle behind them. Angela's heart pounded. They weren't just following her. They were hunting. Reaching into her purse, she pressed a single button on her phone, a direct line to James. A silent alarm. A prearranged signal. 3 miles away, James Matthews glanced down at his phone as the notification flashed across his screen. His blood ran cold. Angela never used that button unless it was an emergency. At that same moment, Zeus let out a sharp bark, his training kicking in. Angela's mind raced. The school was still minutes away. She couldn't lead them there. But she had one advantage. She had Zeus. And if these men thought today would be easy, they were about to make the biggest mistake of their lives. Angela kept her breathing steady, eyes flicking between the road ahead and the black SUV behind her. Her mind worked through possibilities. If she kept driving toward the school, she'd be leading them straight into a vulnerable zone. If she turned toward a police station, she risked them realizing she was onto them and taking drastic action. She needed time. Zeus, sensing her tension, shifted position. His ears twitched, nose flaring as if already calculating the threat. Angela had seen James work with him before, had watched the way he reacted to danger before a human could even process it. Zeus was more than a pet, he was a soldier. Angela made another sharp turn, this time onto a side street lined with trees. The SUV followed, but she wasn't surprised. She gripped the wheel tighter. "Mom?" Sarah's voice was small. "Why aren't we going to school?" Angela forced another smile. "Just taking a detour, sweetie. Everything's fine." But everything was not fine. Inside the black SUV, Marco Ramirez exhaled sharply. "She's onto us." Carlos Vega nodded. "Doesn't matter. We stick to the plan. We take her at the next stop." Marco adjusted his sunglasses. They had chosen this target carefully. Sarah Matthews was the daughter of a Special Forces operative who worked with military K-9 South. Her father was one of the leading trainers in counter-narcotics dog units, responsible for implementing new detection protocols that had cost their cartel millions in seized shipments. The higher-ups wanted leverage over him. And nothing spoke louder than a kidnapped daughter. They had spent weeks mapping out this operation. Angela Matthews had a predictable routine. She took Sarah to school at the same time every morning, parked in the same spot, stayed just long enough to see her daughter walk through the front doors before driving off to her job at Carson Middle School. The father was rarely home during the day. The only variable had been the dog, Zeus. Marco had dismissed him at first. He was just a pet after all. Sure, he was a retired military working dog, but without a handler actively giving him commands, he was no threat. Or so Marco believed. But Carlos wasn't so sure. "I don't like the way that dog moves," he had said during surveillance. "It's trained. It's always watching." Marco had waved him off. "It's a pet. Nothing more." Now as he watched the silver Honda weave unpredictably through traffic, he wondered if Carlos had been right. Angela took another turn, heading for an area she knew well, a stretch of road leading to an open shopping plaza. There would be witnesses, cameras. If they wanted to make a move, they'd have to do it in public. But then the SUV accelerated. Angela's heart slammed against her ribs. She had seconds to decide. She reached for her phone again, hitting speed dial. James picked up immediately. "Angela?" "Followed," she said quickly, keeping her voice even so Sarah wouldn't panic. "Black SUV. 2 men. They're pushing us toward an open stretch." James was already moving. "Stay on main roads. Keep eyes on exits. I'm on my way." Angela tightened her grip on the wheel, adrenaline spiking. James Matthews had spent 20 years in special forces, most of them working with K-9 units on counter-terrorism and cartel interdiction operations. He had trained some of the best military working dogs in the country, Zeus included. After 3 tours in Afghanistan, he had transitioned into training domestic law enforcement units, specializing in narcotics detection and high-risk apprehensions. His work had disrupted multiple cartel routes, earning him more than a few enemies. He had known retaliation was always a possibility. He just hadn't expected them to come for his family. Back in the car, Zeus let out a sharp bark, his body tense. Angela made a snap decision. She wasn't going to wait for James. She had to act now. She slammed the brakes. The SUV skidded to a stop behind her. Before Marco could react, Angela threw the car into reverse, ramming the front bumper of their vehicle before peeling out onto a side street. Zeus barked loudly, the sound deep and commanding. Marco cursed. "Shit, go, go." Angela weaved through traffic, her heart racing. She could hear Sarah's panicked breathing, could feel Zeus shifting beside her, bracing himself. She had to end this chase. And then she saw it, an upcoming intersection where a Denver PD patrol car was stationed. She made her move. Slamming the accelerator, she sped toward the police cruiser. The moment she reached it, she rolled down the window and shouted, "Help!" The officer barely had time to react before the black SUV swerved violently away, disappearing down another street. Angela pulled into a nearby parking lot, breathing hard. She turned to Sarah, brushing hair from her daughter's forehead. "It's okay, baby. It's over." But it wasn't over. Because as Angela sat there, trying to steady her hands, she knew one thing for certain: whoever those men were, they weren't going to stop. And she also knew something else. James was going to make them regret ever trying. Angela barely had time to catch her breath before her phone buzzed again. It was James. His voice was tight, controlled. "Where are you?" "Cherry Creek Plaza." I got the attention of a patrol officer, but they were gone before he could react. She exhaled, gripping the steering wheel. "They're professionals, James. They knew exactly when to break off." James was already moving. "Get inside somewhere public. Stay put. I'm 5 minutes out." Angela turned to Sarah, who clutched Zeus's fur, wide-eyed but silent. "Sweetheart, we're going to wait for Dad, okay?" Sarah nodded, but Zeus wasn't as calm. His posture remained rigid, ears flicking toward every sound, nostrils flaring. He wasn't convinced the threat was gone. And Angela wasn't either. Across town, Marco Ramirez paced inside a dimly lit warehouse, his phone pressed to his ear. Carlos sat nearby, cleaning his pistol, watching the frustration in his boss's movements. "She made us," Marco muttered into the phone. "She knew something was wrong before we even moved in." A pause. Then a voice, deep and menacing, replied, "The girl is still the objective. I don't care how. Fix it." Marco clenched his jaw. Understood. He ended the call, shoving his phone into his pocket. "We move tomorrow. No more games. We take her at the school drop-off." Carlos hesitated. "That dog." Marco shot him a glare. "It's a pet." Carlos didn't argue, but his gut told him otherwise. The next morning, Angela followed the same routine, but with a difference. She took multiple detours, doubling back, watching the mirrors for anything unusual. Zeus sat in the back with Sarah, his eyes sharp, head turning at every shift in movement. James had briefed her the night before, laying out protocols, ensuring she knew what to do if something happened. Angela wasn't military, but after 15 years with James, she understood tactics. And today, her instincts screamed at her to stay alert. Sarah chattered about school, but Angela's attention remained on the road. When they reached Cherry Creek Elementary, she hesitated at the entrance. Something was wrong. The security officer was missing from his usual post. A white utility van was parked unusually close to the drop-off lane. And a man in a maintenance uniform stood just outside the school entrance, adjusting a clipboard, but not actually writing anything down. Angela's fingers hovered over her phone. "Mom?" Sarah frowned. "Why are we stopping here?" Angela forced a calm tone. "Just a second, sweetheart." Zeus whined low in his throat. His head turned sharply toward the maintenance worker. His body language changed, muscles tightening, ears forward, eyes locked. Angela had seen that stance before. Zeus had found something. Before she could react, movement flashed in her peripheral vision. The side door of the white van slid open. Angela slammed the car into reverse just as a man lunged forward, yanking at the passenger door handle. Zeus erupted into a snarl, hurling himself against the window. The attacker stumbled back, cursing, but another man was already moving toward the driver's side. Angela didn't think. She acted. She floored the gas. The Honda shot backward, tires screeching as she veered onto the curb, narrowly missing another vehicle. Parents and children turned in shock as Angela spun the wheel, cutting across the parking lot. The attackers didn't hesitate. The van's engine roared to life, tires peeling against the pavement as it sped after her. Zeus barked, snapping at the window, his entire body coiled and ready. Sarah was crying now, gripping his fur. "Mom!" "I know, baby," Angela said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Hold on." James's voice came through the car's Bluetooth system. "Angela?" "School." "Two men, white van, maintenance disguise," she said rapidly. "They're coming after us." James's response was immediate. "Stay on the main roads." "I'm en route." Angela swerved onto a larger street, forcing other cars to move aside. She knew what the cartel wanted. They had planned this for weeks. And now they were desperate. Behind her, the van accelerated. The driver was reckless, weaving between traffic, trying to close the gap. Angela spotted a red light ahead. No time to stop. She made a choice. Slamming the accelerator, she ran the light, horn blaring as she shot through the intersection. The van tried to follow, but an oncoming truck skidded into its path, forcing it to brake hard. Angela didn't look back. She took the next exit, leading toward a heavily patrolled downtown area. Her heart pounded as she turned onto a crowded street, finally slowing down as she spotted a police cruiser. She exhaled sharply. Sarah sobbed into Zeus's fur. The dog was still rigid, ears pricked. Angela reached back, squeezing her daughter's hand. "It's okay, baby. We're safe now." But she knew that was a lie. This wasn't over, because the cartel had just made a fatal mistake. They had failed. And now, James was going to make sure they never got another chance. James drove like a man possessed. His hands were steady on the wheel, but his mind was a battlefield of calculations. Angela and Sarah were safe for now, but that wouldn't last. These men weren't amateurs. They had planned this operation down to the last detail. A failed attempt wouldn't make them retreat, it would make them desperate. He gritted his teeth, eyes flicking between the road and his phone screen. The secure military tracking system showed Angela's Honda parked near Denver PD headquarters. Good. That gave him a sliver of time to act. Zeus sat in the passenger seat, his posture rigid, ears twitching. He knew something was coming. James reached over, running a hand over the dog's fur. "We're going hunting, boy." His first call was to Elena Rodriguez, an old contact at the D. The line barely rang before she picked up. "James, what the hell is going on?" Denver PD just flagged an attempted abduction linked to a cartel outfit. "That's why I'm calling you. Los Zetas made a move on my daughter this morning." A pause. Then Elena swore under her breath. "You're kidding me. I wish I was. I need intel surveillance, known operatives in the area. Anything that helps me figure out who gave the order." Elena exhaled sharply. "Meet me at the federal building in 20 minutes. James ended the call and took the next exit, pushing the speed limit. His instincts screamed that this wasn't just about Sarah. The cartel wasn't stupid. They wouldn't risk a high-profile kidnapping unless the reward outweighed the risk. That meant leverage, which meant they weren't just after his daughter. They were after him. Inside the federal building, Elena was waiting, a tablet in her hands. She was all business, sharp brown eyes scanning the intelligence feed, fingers moving rapidly as she pulled up files. "We've been tracking increased cartel activity in Colorado, but this?" She shook her head. "This is personal. The men who tried to grab Sarah, they're low level, but someone big signed off on this." James leaned over the table. "Who?" Elena tapped the screen, pulling up an image of a broad-shouldered man with a jagged scar running down his cheek. "Javier Morales. He runs Los Zetas. Denver operations. If they targeted your family, it means they need something from you." James's stomach turned to stone. "They need intel on our K9 border detection units." Elena's face darkened. "Son of a bitch. Los Zetas had lost millions in drug shipments due to the new K9 training protocols James had implemented. They needed to know how the system worked, how to beat it. And they thought they could get that information by taking Sarah." James straightened. "Where's Morales now?" Elena hesitated. "We don't have a location, but we know where his men are holed up. We raided one of their stash houses last week, but we didn't clear out all of them." James didn't need to hear the rest. "Give me the address." Elena hesitated. "James, you know I can't authorize." "I'm not asking for authorization." She exhaled but sent the location to his phone. "Be careful." James was already moving. 30 minutes later, James pulled into a dark alley on the outskirts of the city. The warehouse in front of him was old, abandoned on paper, but the faint glow of security cameras told him otherwise. Zeus sat alert, reading his handler's energy. James checked his weapon, then reached into the glove compartment, pulling out a tactical vest. "Stay close," he murmured to Zeus. "No kills unless I say," Zeus huffed in acknowledgement. They moved fast and silent, slipping through the shadows, using the darkness to their advantage. James spotted 2 guards at the entrance, lazy, distracted, one smoking a cigarette. Amateurs. He crept closer, Zeus at his side, then struck fast. A sharp elbow to the throat took out the first man before he could react. The second barely had time to draw his gun before Zeus lunged, knocking him to the ground with surgical precision. Inside, the warehouse smelled of sweat, cheap cologne, and burnt rubber. Stacks of cash sat in open crates, along with automatic weapons and enough narcotics to put half the city in a coma. James moved quickly, pressing himself against the walls, ears tuned to every sound. Then he heard it. Voices. He followed the sound to a back office, peering through a crack in the door. Inside, 3 men sat around the table. One of them was Marco Ramirez. James's blood ran cold. This was the bastard who had chased Angela and Sarah. He didn't wait. Kicking the door open, he fired 2 precise shots into the ceiling, making the men jolt in shock. "Don't move." Marco reached for his weapon, but Zeus was faster, knocking him backward, teeth bared in a silent snarl. The other 2 raised their hands. James stepped forward, his gun trained on Marco's head. "Who gave the order?" Marco sneered. "You're dead, Matthews." James pressed the barrel against his forehead. "Who gave the order?" Silence. Then Zeus growled, a deep, rumbling warning that sent chills down the spines of everyone in the room. Marco swallowed. "Morales. He said you'd fold if we had the girl." James's jaw tightened. "Where is he?" Marco hesitated. Zeus snapped his teeth an inch from his throat. "Warehouse district." Marco blurted. "Safe house on 10th Street. He's meeting the buyers tonight." James held his stare for another second, then knocked him out cold with the butt of his gun. He turned to Zeus. "We've got a location." Zeus wagged his tail once, ready for the next phase. James grabbed a burner phone from Marco's pocket and dialed Alina. "I've got Morales's location. Get your team ready." Alina's voice was sharp. "How the hell did you?" "Later," James interrupted. "Meet me there in 30. He ended the call and looked down at Zeus. "Time to finish this." Zeus huffed in agreement. They had a war to end. The night air was thick with the scent of gasoline and damp pavement as James crouched behind an abandoned truck, eyes locked on the warehouse ahead. The safe house on 10th Street wasn't just a hideout, it was a fortress. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, their rifles glinting under the floodlights. Vehicles lined the back entrance, engines running, signaling that Morales and his men were preparing to move. James counted at least a dozen hostiles, possibly more inside. Zeus lay low beside him, ears forward, nostrils flaring as he assessed the threats, just as efficiently as his handler. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but they had the element of surprise. A soft vibration from James's phone signaled Elena's team was in position. The D had brought backup silent operators waiting for his mark. But James knew better than to trust an operation this delicate to anyone else. This was personal. They had come for his daughter. He exhaled slowly, fingers tightening around his rifle. Zeus, eyes on the left flank. "On my mark." The German shepherd didn't move, but his body tensed, understanding the command. James waited for the right moment. The guards rotated in predictable intervals, moving in pairs. Sloppy. Amateur. Then he saw him. Javier Morales stepped out from the warehouse flanked by 2 bodyguards. He was talking to a man in a suit, one of the buyers. A shipment deal. That's why they were here. Morales wasn't just orchestrating kidnappings. He was finalizing a major drug transaction. James's jaw clenched. Enough games. He raised his fist. Go. Everything happened in seconds. Zeus launched forward first, a streak of muscle and fur. silent and deadly as he took down the first guard with surgical precision. James moved like a shadow, closing the distance before the second man could react, driving his rifle butt into his jaw with a sickening crack. The man crumpled without a sound. Alarms blared as the compound erupted into chaos. James sprinted toward the warehouse, gunfire exploding around him. Zeus wove through the hail of bullets, a blur of instinct and training, taking down enemies with brutal efficiency. A man swung his rifle toward them, but Zeus lunged, sinking his teeth into his forearm. The man screamed, dropping his weapon before James ended it with a single shot. Inside, Morales was already moving. The moment the first shots rang out, he shoved the buyer aside and sprinted toward the back exit. "Get the shipments out now." His men scrambled to obey, hauling crates of narcotics into waiting SUVs. James reloaded, pushing forward. Elena's team breached the other side of the building, catching the cartel in a deadly crossfire. Flashbangs erupted, throwing Morales' men into disarray. James pressed his radio. "Zeus, find Morales." The German shepherd took off, his nose locked onto the scent. James followed, weaving through crates and fallen bodies, eyes scanning for his target. Then he saw Morales. The cartel boss was already in the driver's seat of a black SUV, tires screeching as he gunned it toward the gate. "Not today," James muttered. He lifted his rifle, aiming for the engine block. One shot, two. The bullets tore through the hood, sending smoke billowing into the night. Morales lost control, the SUV fishtailing before slamming into a concrete barrier. Zeus reached the wreck first, circling the vehicle, growling low. James approached, gun raised. Morales groaned, blood trickling down his forehead as he fumbled for his weapon. His fingers barely grazed the pistol before Zeus lunged, teeth clamping around his wrist, pinning him against the seat. "Call him off." Morales gasped, his bravado shattered. James stepped closer, pressing his gun against the man's temple. "You made 3 mistakes." His voice was calm, ice cold. "You came after my family. You underestimated my partner." He nodded toward Zeus, whose grip remained firm, a silent promise of what would happen if James gave the order. "And you thought you could get away." Morales' breath hitched, his pulse pounding against the barrel of the gun. I can cut a deal." James smiled without humor. "Too late." Police sirens wailed in the distance as Elena's voice crackled through his radio. "Warehouse secured. All targets in custody." "We got him, Matthews." James exhaled slowly. "Copy that." He pulled Morales out of the wreck, twisting his arms behind his back. "Zeus, release." The dog obeyed instantly, stepping back but keeping his eyes locked on the man, daring him to make a move. James turned Morales toward the flashing lights of the approaching law enforcement vehicles. "You thought you could beat us, but you never had a chance." Zeus let out a single victorious bark. And with that, the war was over. The morning air was crisp as the first rays of sunlight stretched across Denver, casting long shadows over the now secured warehouse district. James stood near the wreckage of Morales' SUV, his pulse finally beginning to slow. The chaos of the night had settled into the organized efficiency of a federal crime scene, D agents cataloging evidence, SWAT teams securing the perimeter, and law enforcement loading the surviving cartel members into armored transport vehicles. Morales sat cuffed on the ground, his face a mask of barely contained rage, but James didn't care. The man's empire had crumbled in a single night, and he would spend the rest of his life locked away, watching everything he built rot into nothing. Zeus sat beside James, his breathing steady, tongue flicking out as he observed the scene with the same sharp awareness he had in combat zones halfway across the world. His job wasn't done until James said it was. James reached down, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Good work, partner." Zeus huffed in response, His dark eyes locked onto Morales as if daring him to try something. Elena approached, her expression a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. We found their full ledger system. Every shipment, every corrupt official they've been paying off, every compromised port. This wasn't just a takedown, it was a complete collapse of their regional command. She nodded toward Morales. Your friend here? He just lost everything. James exhaled. Good. A black SUV pulled up, this one friendly. The door opened and Angela stepped out, her eyes immediately locking onto James. Sarah followed, gripping her mother's hand, her face pale but determined. Zeus's ears perked up the second he saw her, and within moments, Sarah had broken into a run, throwing her arms around the dog's thick neck. You're okay. Zeus let out a soft whine, pressing his head against her chest, his tail wagging ever so slightly. James felt the last bit of tension in his body drain away. His family was safe. That was all that mattered. Angela reached him, placing a hand against his chest. Is it over? James glanced at Morales, at the chaos still unfolding around them, then down at Sarah, who was whispering something to Zeus, as if telling him all about her mourning. He wrapped an arm around Angela, pulling her close. Yeah, it's over. As law enforcement continued processing the scene, James found himself thinking about everything that had led to this moment. Morales had believed he could manipulate him, had assumed that threatening his family would be enough to break him. But the cartel had made a fatal error. They hadn't just underestimated a soldier. They had underestimated a father. James had spent his entire career training K9 units to track, to detect, to protect. Zeus wasn't just a weapon, he was a guardian. A soldier who had spent years saving lives. And tonight, he had done it again. Not on a battlefield. Not in some distant war zone. But at home. Sarah looked up at him. Does this mean Zeus can finally rest now? James knelt beside her, running a hand through the dog's fur. He'll always keep watch, sweetheart. That's what he does. Sarah nodded as if she understood completely. Then he's the best dog ever. James smiled. Yeah, he is. Zeus, as if sensing the weight of the moment, let out a deep, satisfied sigh and settled at Sarah's feet. The war was over. The Matthews family was safe. And for the first time in a long time, James finally let himself breathe.